Hello, Black Sunrise fans. Our personal consultations are back. To book your consult, please visit blacksunrise.com. You can now schedule half an hour sessions and 1 hour sessions on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Tuesdays and Wednesdays 12 to 5:30 p.m. and Fridays 12 to 6 p.m. Please remember to spell Black Sunrise BlackSonrise. I look forward to hearing from you. Start. Okay, welcome, Black Sunrise fans. Today we have a really insightful, highly intelligent geneticist, and we're going to talk about all things in terms of genetics and ancestry and heritage. And when I say genetics, I mean your ancestral lineage. I mean, I've known Birth Force 18 as he goes by on Instagram for a while now. He's very intuitive, very thoughtful, insightful person, an amazing researcher, someone, if you're trying to put the pieces of your life back together, or you're trying to put the pieces of your ancestry together, this is someone you want to reach out to get knowledge about where to start and how to go about the process. Birth Force 18, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Renata. I'm so glad to be here. It's an honor.
Oh, wonderful. So tell me a little bit about how you got into ancestry and DNA and archaeogenetics in relationship to yourself and your family.
Yes, thank you for asking that question. It started when I was in junior high school, and for me, junior high school was 1970, 71, 72, 73. So many of your audience probably was not born. But it began at that time. I used to go to my aunt's house my aunt and uncle house practically every weekend. And I purposely went over there because she would always tell me the story about her grandfather. His name was Henry Washington Aldrich. And the stories were like very, inculcated pride in me. Pride, a sense of who I am, belonging. And I would go to her yearbook, and that's how the conversation would start. And she went to Arkansas A&N, which now is called the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. And so I would always ask her the questions, and she would tell me the same story over and over and over again. And that's where the seeds of researching and the inspiration began with my aunt Ernestine Bennett Dillard.
Okay, so you mentioned something really interesting that I want the audience to take note of. You said that when she began to tell you about your heritage, it instilled something in you. So do you think there's a lot of lost people roaming this planet because the genetic and ancestral history has been broken?
I would say absolutely yes. I think that's let me remove that word think. I'm certain that is a key factor in the brokenness and behavior. And when I say behavior, I mean being easily persuaded and controlled by external narratives and opinions and so forth and so on. When you're grounded in your ancestry, it's very difficult for you to be, persuaded. Then it becomes like willful rather than, zombification.
Okay, so my question to you, this one is a personal one. So how did knowing where you came from grounded you so that the external narratives or the external forces didn't toss you to and fro?
Okay, as a quote African American, but also with with Indian ancestry as well. But I would say for here, for right now, just say for the sake of discussion, African American, right? That the distortions in history. There's just a lot of distortions. I'm just being polite. Let me just be frank. A lot of the lies and untruths that are like so prevalent, and it's really prevalent is not the right word. The gaslighting of our history, of our narrative is so pervasive that you have to, if you know your family history, for example, and see, you have a reference point that you can call it out that's a lie. And then be firm with it, and not come from the point of view, from emotions, we come from kings and queens, whereas most people can't prove that. They can't prove that. Yes, I know many of us are descended from, some of us, from kings and queens from Africa, as they say, right? But the vast majority of people that say that, they cannot prove it, right? But you can start with your own family history and use that as your reference point. And then when those lies come forward, you can easily identify and, as they say in the church, rebuke them. But I like what you say. You can reject, renounce, invalidate, and nullify what they say. And you will speak from a point of view of authority. And when you do that, then people back off. Trust me.
That's well said. One of the things I've noticed when I was doing my peripheral work, I haven't gone deep into my immediate line, but I've been looking at the older lines. And one of the narratives that I know is an absolute lie in my own research is how they classified one half of my family. The father side of my family, for instance, we know had a modern slavery narrative, okay? And it was just one branch, right? Whereas my mother's side, with the exception, and I'm just telling you the research that I found, with the exception of my great-grandfather, who was an African American. I was born in the Caribbean. My family's from the Caribbean. With the exception of my great-grandfather, he was an African American who worked for the U.S. Navy. His side experienced slavery, but my grandmother's immediate bloodline, they're Caribs. And the interesting thing is, when you look at the geneticists, they just classify them as Nigerians, which is wholly and totally inaccurate. Not only that, they not only do they classify them as Nigerians, which is wrong because she knows exactly where they came from. They also classified the whole line as slaves, which is another misnomer. Not every Black person in the Americas descended from slaves. Is that correct?
That's very correct.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, what do you want me?
Share, that was some of the research I discovered in my modern DNA, going back maybe 400 or 500 years.
Okay, I got you. Mm-hmm. So let me make some clarification in terms of when people take these genetic tests, whether it's family tree DNA, Ancestry DNA, or 23andMe. Those are the major big companies, right? And then some use MyHeritage, which I don't use MyHeritage, but I mean, to each his own. When you get your results and you see these names like Nigeria or Cameroon, Congo, West Bantu, or Senegal, or Ivory Coast and Ghana, those are not country codes where a lot of people are confused and they get mixed up. They don't represent country code. Those are what you call regional clusters. So in other words, people that these companies extract their DNA from, who are from, maybe let's say from Osun State or from Hausa land, or from, Kano, somewhere in the Hausa area, or Zaria, or let's say they're from Accra, which is in Ghana. So that all that's saying is that the testers in those databases are from that area, and that the person DNA profile is similar to those persons from those areas. That's all that means. So that doesn't mean that I'm from Nigeria, I'm from the Congo. That's where the confusion comes in right there. So I want to, clear that up for the people. So when you do the interpretation of your DNA, you don't look at it. There's no such thing as, I come from Nigeria. There's no evidence of that until after you've actually done the research, or you have a one-to-one match from someone from that area, where then that person can say that, okay, this is a hint that I have a lineage from this particular ethnic group that I'm matching with, that I match with the person who you're matching with. You understand what I'm trying to say? I'm not trying to confuse the audience.
No, absolutely.
A one-on-one match, like I have like 18 100% African genome matches. 6 are Igbo. Okay, so then I can then look at that Nigerian regional cluster and say, okay, that tells me that I have some lineages that are from this particular ethnic group from this particular region. But that doesn't mean that I'm Nigerian, because we have multiple ethnic groups, especially those in the diaspora. So you can't say that, I'm Yoruba, I'm Igbo. No, that's not true. You can say that I have Yoruba ancestry based on my history, if you know your family history, or if you have a DNA match with a person who is actually of that ethnic group. So I just wanted to clear that part up.
That's excellent knowledge. Now, here is another thing that I was looking at too. When it comes to these DNA companies, right? When they analyze the DNA, this is another big mistake that they make. They omit, and I think it's done on purpose. They omit migrations. Okay. And what they look for is modern DNA, and modern DNA going back 400, 500 years. And they do that. They don't necessarily do that for other groups. But I notice when it comes to Black people, as Black people in the Americas, I notice that they tend to take DNA that's modern ancestry, and they omit the migratory patterns, and they omit the older DNA, which actually really tells the person where they come from. For example, when I looked at my own sample from, let's say, 23andMe, it gave me DNA that was maybe 400 years. But I know that was omitting thousands of years of genetic data. So I began to do some digging. And when I did my digging, that's when I found out exactly where my maternal and my paternal lines came from. And they did not come from West Africa. They actually came from East Africa. So is there any truth to that? Modern DNA versus the ancient DNA? Is modern DNA more accurate in terms of placing people with their tribes, or is ancient, older DNA prior to 400 years more accurate?
Okay, so let me also bring some clarification. Like what you're talking about is absolutely true, that that the genetic tests may go back 500 years, but that's autosomal, because the tests are not powerful enough to go back thousands of years from the autosomal point of view. Mm-hmm. And autosomal DNA is different from Y DNA, which is different from mitochondrial DNA, which is not also different from the X chromosome DNA. So when you talk about autosomal DNA, you're pulling in genetics is from the mother and the father, which, based on the science at this point, can just go back like just 500 years. So from that point of view, you can say it's fairly accurate in the modern sense, like you said, but it doesn't go back to the ancient times. But you can say that it does have some validity because of where people were living in the last 500 years, the region that they were living. And within that region, they developed certain types of genetics that's similar to people that's in that region, that they've lived in, for so many generations. Okay. But to go back like more, I guess you can say anthropological, that's when you use Y-DNA or mtDNA testing, the single line testing. Like Y-DNA and mtDNA are single line testing, which goes back to the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. You can use that as a kind of pinpointing for migration. That's why for me personally, what I've done was I've had 25 members of my family test. No, 30. I did. I'm not gonna lie, 30. 15 on my father's side, about 15 on my mother's side. So that I can pull in enough data, because DNA is not distributed equally. So if you may have a match with a person that you may not inherit the DNA segment, but your brother or your sister may have. That's why for the efficaciousness of the autosomal test, I'm gonna be honest with you, you have to test more than one family member. Otherwise, you can end up with a lot of false positives. Because if you're the only one person, then yes, that doesn't mean that it's not accurate or not, but it may be a false positive in some cases. When if you bring in more family members, then you will have, I guess you can say, more validity. It gives more weight to the testing than if it's just yourself. Otherwise, as far as ancient DNA is concerned, Y-DNA and mtDNA would be the way to go. And that's also where you can find and track migration patterns. That's why, like I was saying, as far as testing is concerned, I test more than one person. And then I test also those who are not in my who are like in my flat Y or my flat mtDNA. What I mean by flat Y or flat mtDNA, meaning that someone, let's say my mother's father's cousin, who may have a different paternal line than I do. You see that I can't test for it because I'm not in that direct Y-DNA. So I would have those persons to also do the Y-DNA and the mtDNA, so that you can get a broad picture of the migration, and then you can start to tracking back, like you were saying, not just in West Africa, but East Africa as well, or North.
Or any other part of Africa, or some people, or outside of Africa, because we have the Ipiuna man that they found in Brazil, and the Ipiuna man came from South Africa, and he was in Brazil for 10,000 years. In northern Brazil, they found him. We have Lucia, who was, I think she was 12,500 years old. Lucia was from Southern Africa, and she has the face of not a koi, but I think that it's South Africa. She has the face of I think they're from Mozambique. I forgot the tribe. But the interesting thing is when they reconstructed Lucia and they realized she was Black, 12,500 years, they found her in a cave in Belo Horizonte in the northeast of Brazil. All of a sudden, the museum burnt down with her bones in it. So, there are Black people who were in the Americas and they're being constituted as Africans, which is correct. I am absolutely not listening to these ignorant people that said we did not come from Africa. No, we have the genetics to prove there was different migrations out of Africa. So one of the things I wanted you to clarify, can you explain to us why DNA mtDNA, and I'm assuming these are sex cells they use to test the genetics, right? As opposed to autosomal. Is that correct?
Yes, the Y DNA is a sex cell.
Right.
And the X chromosome is a sex cell.
Right. So
but
can you...
The mtDNA is not necessarily, it's a sex cell, but not like the Y and the X, because the mtDNA is passed on to both male and female, which also is telling the fact that it's passed on to both children, as opposed to a Y is only goes to one, to just the male descendant. So that needs to be kept in the mind too. But that goes back to what you were saying with the single testing system, is how you identify what you just said, that that you have ancestry outside of the continent of Africa. Like I have a friend. She is, I'm going to use this term, she's like M32C. And MT32C is most definitely like Madagascar or India or those places in Southeast Asia, you see? So we're not talking about on the continent of Africa per se right now. So that's how you're able to pinpoint that. That's why, I encourage, although it's costly, it can be, if this is what you want, it depends on if what your goals are. Is why, like, when I've done the testing, I've made sure I try to encourage other family members to do the mtDNA, Y-DNA that's on my flat Y. So, like I said, another example is, let's say, my grandmother's father's mother side, for example, that I can't test for. So I would have them to do those Y-DNA and mtDNA, because that's where you begin to discover, like, oh, this person was actually mtDNA B, which is Native American, you see, or mtDNA M1, which is like India or East Africa, even though it's on the continent of Africa. But that particular haplogroup is definitely one of those that migrated into, like, through the Strait of Aden up to India, to parts of Melanesia, using those terms, or Indonesia, so forth and so on. That's how you're able to do exactly what you said, and how they're able to identify the different African lineages that were in South America thousands of years before so-called slavery. Yes.
So that's fascinating. One of the things I discovered, and I was trying to get clarification on this, and I'm just using myself as an example, so that if people come upon discrepancies, you'll be able to help them. So when I did 23andMe, my maternal haplogroup, mtDNA, came back the L line, which makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a public DNA testing company. So what I did is I said, you know what, let me do it again. Let me run it again to make sure. And I went to a private geneticist. Okay, not like these commercial public company. This person is an actual geneticist, and it was a private company. They don't even allow you to download your DNA, your raw DNA data. And when I had that test done, they put me under V2, which is dead center England. I called the company and I said to the company, I think you made a mistake. There is no way in hell my maternal haplogroup is in England. So while I was on the phone, the customer service rep said, okay, that's fine. Hold on. Let me call the lab and have them pull your DNA again, because they keep it, and we're going to run it again, right? So they pulled it. I waited for 10, 20 minutes on the phone. They pulled it. They ran it. And then she came back and she said, okay, ma'am, they just ran your DNA again, and it came back that you are V2 and your maternal haplogroup is out of England. There wasn't a mistake. I said, ma'am, I am not white with black traits. I said, I am black, period. There's something wrong. So she was like, oh my goodness. I was like, that's the wrong maternal haplogroup. So she was on the phone talking to the lab, and the lab was adamant. We went through the test kit numbers, went through my name, ran it again, and they were adamant. They said, ma'am, your maternal haplogroup is out of England. Now, how could that happen?
Well, let me just go back when you said the commercial databases. 23andMe does not do deep SNP testing. They just do the basic, they just give you your basic haplogroup. But companies like Family Tree DNA, they specialize in deep SNP testing, or what is called high throughput sequencing testing. They also offer full mitochondrial DNA testing, which theirs is pretty much accurate, so, and also companies like the Full Genome Corp that does more powerful DNA testing. They do like the powerful Y DNA testing where they cover at least like 99% of the Y chromosome, whereas Family Tree does, at this point, I think they are at 85%, maybe 90% now, but they have the Y DNA, Big Y 700. So, and those tests are pretty on point, I would have to say. So, I would have recommended still do testing with either with like what did I say, Full Genome Corp, or with Family Tree DNA, a full mitochondrial sequence test, which will give the closest accurate mtDNA haplogroup. That would be my answer to that. Because even though it's a private company, that's great. But I would rather have someone that's tested, that's done the testing, that have the numbers out there, even though it's commercial, like 23andMe, it's commercial, but they do basic mtDNA tests. They don't do deep SNP testing. They just give you your basic haplogroup. That's mainly a company that focuses on mainly health genetics. That's how it started off, 23andMe. Its focus is mainly health genetics, and they just include the autosomal, and then give you your basic mtDNA or your Y-DNA haplogroup. But the companies that give the high throughput, I'm talking about the tests like millions of SNPs, like Family Tree DNA, or a company like Full Genome Corp, or now they have Dante and several others that are out there now.
That's an interesting answer, because the private company that I went in that specialized in genetics did a full sequence of my mtDNA. That's why I paid for it. So I paid to get my Ancestry done with them. This is not 23andMe, it's another company. And they offered the service of full sequencing of your mtDNA.
And did they give you the raw data?
No, they don't. They do not give you the raw data.
Well, see, I wouldn't even trust that, because you would want, the reason why you want the raw data, because you want to be able to see the SNPs yourself.
Right.
Because there are trees, there are phylogenetic trees that are available that you can do the comparison yourself. So any company, to me, that does not release the raw data, I would not trust it.
Okay.
That includes African Ancestry, which I've tested with them too, but they don't release raw data, and they do low resolution testing, which is not useful.
Got it.
They give you like hints, like a hint or an idea, but you can't do any tracing with that.
Absolutely. Okay, great. When I spoke to them about that raw data, we're coming up on 2 minutes in this first segment to end. But when I called the company and I asked them, I said, listen, why don't you hand over the raw DNA? And they said because of security reasons, they do not allow people to download DNA. So I said, okay. They said, but in the future, when we have the legal structure in place, we will offer that to our customers. Okay, so this has been fascinating. We're coming up on the first break. Here's a thought. Why is it imperative that a person who is seeking to develop themselves spiritually, why is it their ancestry is the foundation with which to attain spiritual development? You got 1 minute.
That's an excellent question. I love that, because that is the source of like what people call God. That's where you find your God gene. and these people give you the evidence. They kind of clue it out to you, because in their book, in their New Testament, they're always talking. They open up with the genealogy of the one they call Jesus, who I don't think was a real person, but still it has the analogy, or what you could say, anyway, it starts out with the genetics. And they always say the God of Asia, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, which tells you that these deities,
10 seconds.
Their genetics in the human population. That's why.
Okay, so in the next segment, we will be discussing more about ancestry and spiritual